Carney, your world has to be on fire at this point, because when you're coming out of this summer, I would not want to be you or your party. All right. Everybody knows at least some of the events that have gone on with the Air Canada situation. So Air Canada and the flight attendant union, they've been negotiating for, I believe it's about 8 months. And one of the major issues that the union has argued for, now this is just the facts, this is not our opinion one way or the other, this is just the facts. So one of the major sticking points for the flight attendant union is that they are only paid for the work that they do while the plane is basically in motion. So Tanya was looking this up earlier, so if you want to...
Yeah, so it's basically from the time that the pilot releases the brake until they get to the next place and put the brake back on. So that's when the flight attendants are paid. However, they're still expected to do things such as safety demonstrations, and they're expected to do things on the ground. And for example, if they're stuck on the runway because maybe there's been a mechanical failure with a part of the plane, they are stuck on that plane for however many hours it is without pay, because the plane is not in motion.
Now, what was confusing me, and I may be the only one in Canada that was confused by this. Tanya wasn't. I understood that to be essentially that their shift starts when the plane is in motion, but that's not correct, because they're obviously, as Tanya said, they're working even half an hour to an hour before the plane actually gets in motion, because they're helping people on, they're helping people with their bags, and as she said, doing safety demonstrations and all of this stuff, but they're not technically paid for that. Now,
right, and my question was, how is that legal? How are you required to be at work, like ready to perform your job, and in these cases actually doing your duties of your job, but not getting paid for it? And the answer is that it's in their collective agreement.
And it's also in the collective agreements of virtually every other flight attendant union in North America. That's a very significant aspect to this. So those are just the facts, and that kind of has led us up to the recent weekend. Now, they had talked about potentially going on strike as of Monday, right? And one thing led to another, and the union had announced that we are, in fact, going to go on strike on Monday. And then yesterday, supremely qualified, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more, Minister of Labor Patty Hajdu came out and had a press conference. This is what she said.
After 8 months of negotiations and weeks of intensive mediation, Air Canada and the Canadian Union of Public Employees flight attendants were unable to reach a tentative agreement. The government firmly believes that the best deals are reached by the parties at the bargaining table, and we will never stop believing that. The government
firmly believes that the best agreements are concluded at the bargaining table. We will never stop believing that.
It's not easy, but when parties put in the hard work at the table, Canadians are better off as a result.
It's not easy, but when everybody puts in their best, the Canadians are the winners.
In this instance, and despite resolution on a number of key items, this dispute will not be resolved quickly enough. And the impact of the work stoppage at Air Canada that began early this morning is already being felt by travelers. This is causing significant harm and has negative impacts on Canadians and the Canadian economy. It impedes the movement of passengers and critical cargo, such as pharmaceuticals, and it strands thousands of Canadians abroad, making it extremely costly and sometimes impossible to book new flights. Canadians have already sacrificed a lot in this uncertain economy, and this labor disruption is adding to their worries and financial burdens. As Minister of Labour, I have exercised my authorities under Section 107 of the Canadian Labour Code to direct the Canada Industrial Relations Board to order the parties to resume and continue their operations and duties in order to secure industrial peace and protect the interests of Canada, Canadians, and the economy. I've also asked the board to assist the parties in reaching a settlement of the outstanding terms of their collective agreement by imposing final and binding arbitration, and to extend the terms of the existing collective agreement until a new one is determined by the arbitrator. Flight attendants play a critical role in getting Canadians to where they need to go safely, and they deserve to be compensated and treated fairly at all times. My job as Minister of Labour isn't to take sides during labour disputes. It's to give the parties the tools that they need to reach a fair and timely agreement while keeping the best interests of Canadians at heart. And that's why I intervened today. Canada's economy has seen unprecedented attacks on trade and significant tariff actions. Amid these challenges, Canadians have been stepping up for months to support their friends and their neighbours and their local communities. In a year where Canadian businesses and families have faced too much disruption and uncertainty, they shouldn't have to shoulder another blow.
Okay. Now, for those of you who may be confused and you think it's Groundhog Day, I wouldn't blame you. Because for a party that seems to repeat this trope that, well, we believe that, you know, the best thing is for parties to be at the bargaining table. So during the CN rail strike, they imposed binding arbitration and sent them back to work. And then when Canada Post was doing the same thing, they ordered them back to work. And now we're seeing a force back to work and binding arbitration for Air Canada. Now, I don't know how you can say, well, you know, it's good when both parties are at the negotiating table, but then you step in and you essentially force one side out and force one side back to work, or you force binding arbitration and then basically arbitrator comes in and decides what the new agreement's going to be.
Well, and this is the part I find most intriguing, is that the Liberals and the NDP together did Bill C-58 in the last Parliament, and that was essentially anti-scab legislation, so that they couldn't use alternate workers if their workers went on strike. And that was in federally regulated professions such as air travel, banks, etc. So in a sense, the government had agreed to side with the workers on this bill, saying that, okay, well, your employer can't just replace you for the time that you're on strike. But that also left the employer with very few options otherwise, especially in something, say, air travel, for example, where you are going to have Canadians stranded all over the world that they're not able to get home. So on one hand, they're supporting the workers, and then on the other hand, when they're called in by the employers, they shut down the strike. So what the heck is going on here?
Well, that's the question, right? And I think the main issue here is because Mark Carney has literally achieved nothing in his first few months as Prime Minister, and he's going into a very chaotic fall. I think this was no doubt, and everyone's going to say, of course it was, no doubt, a political decision only to save face for the Liberals, because a strike now for Air Canada, when a lot of people have basically worked the whole summer and said, I'm going to take my vacation in for the last couple of weeks in August, and now that might be completely destroyed as a result of a strike, there's going to be, like, all hell would break loose.
A lot of people are going to be really upset. And what about people who are already on vacation and they're overseas and they're trying to come home to Canada?
Right.
What about those people? So this is a really bad situation.
Okay, so Patty Hajdu, she had that press conference. And after that, there were some discussions going on with the local union and the national the national organization, QP. But before we get to that, want to want to clarify one thing before we forget. So looks like we did actually have a flight attendant in the chat who clarified that they are actually paid for the safety demonstrations, and their pay starts as soon as the door closes to the plane. So thank you very, very much for that. And who is that?
It was Fly 10th.
So thank you very much for clarifying that for us. So, which I guess makes sense, because if the safety demonstration happens while the plane starts leaving the gate, which memory serves that's usually when it happens, that would make sense. So thank you very much.
Well, and above and beyond that, I mean, these flight attendants are still working, like they're doing work for their job that they're not getting paid for. One of the sources that I had read today, and you'll forgive me, I don't recall which one it was, but they said that on average, these flight attendants are doing about 35 hours of work per month that they're not getting paid for. That's almost an entire week every month.
Right.
So I can definitely understand where they're coming from.
So, so when the when QP National essentially had their discussions with the QP local union for these flight attendants, well, they came to a decision, and this is the press or the call it a press conference that Mark Hancock had, who's the president of QP. And watch your volume on this. I've lowered the volume of the video, but there's a bunch of cheering in this, so just be mindful of the volume. And if it's a little too high, I apologize, but I've tried to do what I could with this video.
With some amazing folks. You know, let's hear it for Wesley and the whole bargaining team. Let's hear it for our staff that put in so much. All of the union leaders here, me and every leader that's here, thank you so much. Of course, Candace Reddick, our amazing Secretary Treasurer. But most importantly, my friends, all of you. You know, we celebrated a year or so ago when the Liberal government brought in anti-scab legislation. You know, it was a pretty big moment for us. But here's the push. What's the point of having anti-scab legislation if we can't go on strike? And time again, government after government is trampling on our free rights, our collective agreement rights, our charter rights to strike. Shame on you! 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 I brought a little paper with me. This is the CIRB order. Here's what I'm supposed to do. I'm expected to say, stand down. I'm expected to direct you to go back to work. I'm expected to end this strike.
Hopefully your eardrums didn't get blown out there. Okay. So before we unpack this, we have two more short clips to show. One thing that Mark Hancock did say that he has a right to say there, and it is something that needs to be called out, is that this is a potential infringement on their charter rights. Section 2D, to be precise. Section 2D in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the provision is everyone has the following fundamental freedoms, and 2D is freedom of association. Now, that seems very simplistic, but there's been a bunch of precedent and Supreme Court rulings that actually supports that part of that 2D is the right to collectively bargain. So one of the major issues here is that right to collectively bargain has been removed from them because they've been forced into binding arbitration. So they cannot collectively bargain anymore, which you could make an argument, and I imagine they will, in court, that actually violates their Section 2D Charter of Rights. Okay, fine. So while we're talking about charter rights, I feel it very important to call everybody back to this old white guy that you may know. And he was actually talking really early on in the electoral campaign about charter rights and the Liberal Party. Get ready to laugh or lose your lunch. I don't know what it is, but I just want to make sure that everyone remembers this.
The first is that the Liberal Party is the party of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We will always defend the Charter. I've made clear.
The Liberal Party is the party of the Charter rights. We will always defend the Charter. We will always uphold the Charter. I need Jim. Are you kidding me?
So in addition to this instance where the Liberals are ordering these workers back to work and violating their charter rights, what else did they do? And was it around 2022, was it?
Yeah, there was some small gathering in Ottawa, and they pulled something called the Emergencies Act, which was called out in the U.S. 2024 Human Rights Report, by the way.
Right.
Just saying.
But yeah, you know, they're the party of protecting charter rights. Yeah.
Right. Unreal. So that's Mr. Carney, and so the hypocrisy is crazy because this is only 5 months later, and they're doing that. Now, everyone, I think everybody, knows how much of a man crush that Tom Mulcair has had on Mark Carney. You may even call him a sycophant at this point. But something crazy happened. Tom Mulcair completely turned on Mark Carney when it came to this issue.
Well, because Mulcair is NDP, or formerly NDP.
I don't know what he is at this point.
Yeah, fair.
But take a look at this.
All right, let's start with Air Canada. The union has refused to return to work as per the government's order. What do you make of this decision?
I think it's one of the very first big missteps by the Carney government. They blew this one. You have labor relations. That means that there are two sides, as in any relationship. But Minister Haidu and the Carney government have weighed in so heavily on the side of Air Canada in this one that it's galling. The union raises the issue of the appearance of conflict of interest with the person who's now in charge of the Canada Industrial Relations Board, Maryse Tremblay, that you just referenced in that lead-up. Well, how is it even possible that we're debating that? She spent her career inside Air Canada representing them as a lawyer or as outside counsel. And now she's in charge of the Labor Relations Board. By the way, I'm not taking anything away from her in terms of her skills as a lawyer. But when you've got such an obvious appearance of conflict of interest, you deal with it immediately. Here, you're trying to use that institution to force back to the table, go to binding arbitration, and they seem to have forgotten in the Liberal Party, they once knew, that labor rights are guaranteed under the Canadian Constitution. Mr. Carney spent the campaign, whenever he was asked about Bill 21, would you challenge Quebec's laws that are discriminatory to the Supreme Court? He had a very good answer, which is the Liberals are the party of the Charter of Rights. Well, guess what? The Charter of Rights protects labor relations. It protects the right to become a member of a union. It protects the right to negotiate and bargain collectively. And you can't take that away lightly, as the Carney government has just done. Now, it's the dead of summer. I'm not sure that Minister Haidu has a lot of experience in these things, but they've created an unbelievable mess. And by the way, sometimes easy to finger wag and point at the unions. I know Mark Hancock, one of the union leaders from QP who was there. This guy is experienced. He's not a hothead. He had that gesture of tearing up the order, but I think he was trying to get a message across, because Mark Hancock is not somebody who does that lightly. And I think that the Canadian Union of Public Employees has a history, a trade, a fine track record of being able to work and overcome great difficulties. Here, the government seems to have set up a brush fire on its own, and it's very difficult to imagine how they're going to be able to get out of this one. If the union is saying, there's no way you're forcing us back, there's no way you're doing this, are they going to start coming up with outrageous threats of penalties? All this is going to be played out before the courts. By the way, Renee, this should have been thought out in advance. And there are some very smart people around Carney, but I guess a lot of them are on holidays right now, because this is one of the worst messes that I've seen them in since they got elected at the end of April.
All right, let's.
There you go, folks. It's
This looks really bad for the Carney government.
So let's start to kind of unpack. Let's unpack this. What does this mean? Well, one thing that Tom Mulcair talked about in there, if you're listening, is the head of the CIRB was a former lawyer for Air Canada. So when you're asking that person to send these people back to work, he correctly says that's a conflict of interest. Now, maybe the problem is there's so many conflicts of interest that happen within the Liberal Party is they don't even understand what it means anymore.
No, they don't. They clearly don't.
So that's probably what's going on there. So that's a big issue. And just from a legal standpoint, I'm not a huge fan of unions, but objectively, they would have a really big case there to say that this is completely improper. This is infringing on our charter rights. There is a conflict of interest at the CRB. This whole thing is problematic, and I think they would have a legal case there. So usually, what happens when the government says, "Okay, we're ordering you back to work, binding arbitration," you start working under the previous agreement until a new one is reached. That's typically what happens. And there is a case, I think it was back in the 70s, 1977, I think so, if memory serves, where a union didn't go back when ordered to, and they actually put the head of the union in jail as a result of that.
Yes, this came up in our research today. So what's likely to happen if the union doesn't go back to work? Well, the union as a whole could face penalties, including financial, or possibly, as happened in the 70s, that the union leader could wind up in jail.
Right. So what Air Canada could then say is, listen, we are losing X amount of dollars per day, and they could go after the union for financial penalties. Now, this now takes us into, would they have to pay those penalties? Yes, they would. They wouldn't be able to avoid those penalties. The next question is okay, where would those Where
Where's
would
the
those
money coming
penalties
from?
come from?
Yeah.
So this could start as quote unquote little as tens of thousands of dollars per day, and it could go up to millions and go up to tens of millions the longer their illegal strike goes, because technically it is now a illegal strike.
Right. Now that the government has ordered these workers back to work, if they were to remain on strike or go on strike, then it becomes an illegal strike, and the employer can then go after them for loss, for damages.
Right. So who pays for that? Well, that comes out of the union war chest. Where does that money come from? That comes from the union dues that members pay. Now the thing is this wasn't just the local president, because there's like the main president of the big CUPE union, and then there's like local presidents of the mini unions as they were. This wasn't the local guy doing this and saying this. This was the national president of CUPE. So where the government will be going after is the national president and the national union. So the issue here is that if the strike goes on long enough, the union could potentially be forced to pay, the national union could be forced to pay millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in restitution for this illegal strike. What happens then? Here's the rub, folks. And this is where the flight attendants need to really understand the position that they're in. What may happen is if those funds are depleted to such a degree, the union, the executive union for National CUPE, could turn around and say, sorry folks, that last interaction with the government depleted our funds to such a degree. Well, we need to replenish them, and we need to replenish them quickly. How would they do that? They would potentially look at raising your union dues. Not just the flight attendants, but
everybody.
Every union member in CUPE across the country, regardless of profession. Consider that. We're not saying one way or the other. We're just laying it down.
That this is a possibility.
That this is a possibility.
Yep.
So, because whenever you look at these labor disputes, you have to look at the adjacent factors, and you have to look at 2 or 3 steps down the road at what the full impact of this would be. So, and here's the other thing, folks. Mr. Hancock, he gets paid whether or not these people go on strike. He gets paid if the entire union across Canada, all unions that are attached to CUPE go on strike, he still gets paid. Why? Because he doesn't work for any of these individual organizations. He gets paid as a result of these union dues. That's the thing to make sure that we understand about these union executives. And we took a look just to get a sense as to how much he might be making himself.
Now, we weren't able to verify an exact number, but we had 2 sources that said this particular number unverified.
Yeah, so on average, he probably makes, according to these 2 unofficial sources, around $170,000 a year.
And again, that's according to unverified sources.
So that's what we found out about that. So just context from the other side. So this is a guy, he's ripping up the CIRB, he's making a big show, he's making a big song and dance. He's not impacted by this at all.
No, he still gets paid.
At all. So just consider that. We firmly believe, going back to what Tanya was saying initially, that the issue that the flight attendants are talking about is a legitimate issue. 100%. We are 100% in the flight attendants' corner as it relates to this. But we're looking at this objectively from all sides. The other thing to consider is what happens if the local union is successful in this? Well, if they're successful in this, then Air Canada is no doubt going to have to raise ticket prices for everybody, going to raise baggage fees for everybody, because they're going to have to pay thousands of hours more per year to these flight attendants than they were before.
And above and beyond that, because this is a practice that's happening all across North America with various different airlines, now the workers in the other unions are going to start wanting to get paid for that time as well. Again, we don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to get paid for the time you're working, but these are the external ramifications that will happen. And we also think this is why the QP president, or the leader there, is pushing for this so hard, because if he does it for this union, then all the other unions that he will represent for airlines are going to want the exact same deal.
Well, it gives them precedent.
Well, and he's the hero, right? Look at me, I got this deal for the flight attendants, and we were able to do it across the whole country, et cetera, et cetera.
Someone says, stop sticking up for major corporations. We're not sticking up for major corporations. We're telling you this is what happens. This is not opinion. This is what would happen. So, like, you can't just go into a union fight like this, close your eyes and close your ears, and just think
it's all going to work in my favor.
It's all going to work in my favor, and then nothing's going to happen. You have to understand what the ramifications are, and maybe all this will play out exactly like this. Now, what will most likely happen, in our opinion, this is where we get back to opinion. What will most likely happen is, will the union succeed in getting hourly pay for the flight attendants as they've asked for? Probably not. But what is likely, in our opinion, is that they will get something. They'll get some sort of stipend, or they'll get some sort of remedial
or like
compensation,
a wage increase or something like that.
Yeah. One really easy way to do this is to just give a larger wage bump to kind of offset that. So instead of, let's say, a 5% increase, maybe they're going to give them a 7% increase, and say that 2% is to compensate you for the other work that you do outside of these hours. So that's most likely what's going to happen, because the arbitrator is going to look at this and say, well, it's not fair to do nothing. And they're going to say to the union, it's not necessarily fair to go all the way, so we'll do something in between. That might be what happens. If the arbitrator happens to rule in the union's favor, that's what's going to happen. And we say that all of the other unions are going to follow suit if that happens. Well, the other unions are probably going to follow suit for this gain benefit anyway. It's going to affect the prices at the airport. That's just a reality. Why? Because remember, corporations are not charities. Corporations care about one thing and about one thing only: profit. So if costs go up, guess what? Prices go up. Or the other thing that they may do is cut jobs elsewhere.
Or even cut jobs with flight attendants. Maybe you have, I don't know, 3 on a plane instead of 4. Like, I have no idea.
This is the issue that Canada Post is having right now. Canada Post is arguing for some massive wage increase to the corporation who is bleeding money. So how do you do that?
You can't. Money doesn't just come out of thin air unless you're the Liberal government.
So now, Air Canada used to be a Crown Corp. It is not a Crown Corp anymore. But this is what happens. So everyone needs to go into this eyes wide open, no matter who you support, right? No matter who you support. I think because again, this comes back to the flight attendants have a legitimate gripe here. 100%. You should get paid for the work that you do. Full stop. How do you get there? And they're choosing to go this route. This is potentially what they may have to deal with. They may have to pay higher union dues, which means, and right now I think they pay between, like unions typically pay between 1.5 and 2%, I think, of their wages to union dues. Some of them less. It depends on the union itself. But you're going to get more from the negotiation, but is that just going to get eaten up in union dues because of this restitution that the union may have to pay as a result of this illegal strike? These are all of the factors that need to come into play. So when you're looking at this and when you're reviewing your union executive, just make sure you're considering all of the factors. So anyway, this is where we're at when it comes to the Air Canada strike. Either way, never mind what happens with Air Canada and the union. The Carney government right now, they're in an impossible situation. So you've had somebody say to the emperor, no, I'm not going on strike. Thank you very much. Now what? Now they're going to have to decide, okay, are we going to penalize them even more, which makes them look even worse when it comes to the potential court challenge of their charter rights and freedoms. But we are now in an established pattern with the Liberal Party over the last couple of years where they've intervened in 3 different labor disputes. If you're the party of the charter, then why do you keep getting in the way? So it's going to be a real challenge. And this week, man, there's going to be a lot of heat on Carney. There's going to be a lot of heat on Air Canada. And there's going to be a lot of heat on the CIRB because of this conflict of interest. So if you are one of the impacted people that works for Air Canada and as a flight attendant, I think this is going to be a situation where you're going to have a lot of public support, I think, just because of the main issue at large here. And if you're one of the travelers, even though, like, try and make alternate arrangements. It's going to be interesting to see how Air Canada deals with this. I don't know if they're giving cancellation fees or not.
And I think this is why the government stepped in so quickly, was because you could potentially have Canadians stranded overseas in a foreign country where there's no other route home. Like some places, Air Canada is the only place that flies.
Right.
So what are you going to do? Like if you're over in Europe or something, or if you're over in the Middle East, like what are you going to do? How are you going to get home? So, but you know, as it relates to the Carney government, you know, maybe this is why, maybe this is what this image is supposed to actually symbolize. Like the further you get to Ottawa, the hotter it is. So maybe this is the political climate that it's actually measuring, and not the actual temperature right now. Because if you're in Ottawa right now, man, Carney, your world has to be on fire at this point, because when you're coming out of this summer, I would not want to be you or your party.